What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of The Green Dream right here on Turfs Up Radio. As promised, as I talked to you guys last week, I've got a special guest with me today, Steven Cohen with BCLS Landscape Services. Steven, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. So, man, there's so much stuff that I wanted to talk about on this show. Super excited. I'm glad we put this together after we came out to see you, because now I have even more questions. And I have to say I'm very impressed with the way you guys operate. Coming out of that week, I know you guys were going through some hiccups and some stuff. And when I was with Howard, he was telling me some of the woes of being in that size of a company. And you guys, I mean, I'm sure everybody hits a level where you're like, oh, we could do this better, but from an outside perspective that I've seen a lot of lawn and landscape companies, like, dude, you guys have your game together. Like, I was so impressed, so many levels. So before we get into all that stuff, I want you to take everybody back to the beginning of young Steven. How did you get into the green industry? Take me back to the very beginning. What was the intro to lawn and landscaping?
So it's actually a great story, and I love to tell it. We probably don't even have enough time on the show to share it all, so I'm gonna try to abbreviate it. But here's the abbreviated version. So I grew up in Westchester County, New York, which is an affluent area outside New York City. And the neighborhood I grew up in, it was comprised of at that time, young professionals. And I describe it in this context when I do presentations on the story. My father was in pharmaceuticals. My neighbor to the left of us was an attorney. And then across the street, I had a second generation mason. I had a second generation landscaper, and I had a second generation nursery garden center owner. And then next to them was a IBM corporate executive. And
Dang.
they all bought the houses in the neighborhood at the same time, all different types of educational backgrounds and histories with them. But as a kid growing up, my neighbor and mentor, Frank Tremontano, who was the landscaper, did the landscaping on my parents' house. So I would watch, Frank's crew come over and do the landscaping, and I would go out there and dig with them, and I would talk to his guys who back then were a lot of Italians back then, before the Spanish became prevalent in our industry. And then I watched Victor Basari, who was the other neighbor who did the masonry, built my parents' beautiful flagstone patio, and at some point put fireplaces into our house. And I would watch him do the brickwork, and I was very intuitive at a young age of watching how people worked. And when my friends were playing baseball and sporting, I was digging in the garden. And I remember my parents didn't have an irrigation system in the house, and all my neighbors did. And I wanted everything to have an irrigation. And I remember taking a bus into the city called White Plains and going to this big hardware store and buying a roll of poly pipe and fittings and bringing it back on the bus. And I put this irrigation system into my house by just watching them do irrigation on other houses. And I back then I didn't know anything about solenoid, so everything had a valve on it and you had to turn it on. And when I got the whole system in, my father was so impressed with it. He then had Frank come over and automate the system and put the valves on it to make it an automated system. But I essentially did the whole system. So,
Dang.
and then the last mentor is a really important one, because my two mentors are my father in the pharmaceuticals and Manny Sheman. Manny Sheman was the other neighbor, and he was his father started what was called Emanuel Sheman Garden Center in Bronx, and it was a small little garden center in Bronx, New York. And his son Manny moved that garden center after it closed to Greenwich, Connecticut, and renamed the business Emanuel Sheman Horticulturist. And it's a great story. Manny Sheman founded what became one of the largest horticultural distribution chains within the United States. This is before the site one. What's interesting is when Manny sold his company, he sold it to Weyerhaeuser, which is a big forestry conglomerate. And that was Weyerhaeuser's entry into the nursery business. And then Weyerhaeuser ended up selling it to a private equity firm, a bunch of young guys in Greenwich, Connecticut, who eventually sold it to Site One.
Oh,
but
wow.
Manny Sheman was I worked for Manny. He would not let me work for him until I got my working papers. I actually worked for a Bulgarian guy at a garden center before him. And what Manny said, when you get your working papers, you can come and you can work at the Sheman nurseries. And I learned a lot about culture at Sheman. And again, looking back, the intuitiveness I had at that age was pretty amazing because at Sheman, all the workers were Portuguese. And I noticed that Manny knew every worker's name. He knew every worker's family members, and he knew everybody's birthday. And I went to a couple of Christmas parties, and to see his interaction with everybody was very interesting. But I also was intuitive and picked up something else. Manny had a very young management team working with him. And when I say young management team, these were guys who entered into the landscape horticultural distribution business, in their mid to late 20s. And I've watched these people over the course of my career. I've been doing it over 45 years. They became, and a lot of them have since retired, but they became very successful, working in different areas of sales and management and executive leadership because of their upbringing and mentorship with Manny. But I would watch some of those people go into Manny's office for a conversation. And when they went into the meeting, I knew there was a problem. Like I would see the facial expressions, and I knew they were going into a meeting that was going to have some sort of, disciplinary or we have to do better at it. But the one thing I noticed is every time they came out of that meeting, Manny would always shake the individual's hands, and they always both had smiles on their faces. And that's something which really, looking back at it today, really led me to believe of Manny's the culture that Manny built within his organization. And it was very easy for me to look at the culture that Manny built in his organization and compare that to the culture that my father built in his organization, and see that both men were very successful with what they did. Both men were very successful with their outcomes at the end, but both got their companies to the same place a very different way. And that was difference in culture. And that was something that was very powerful to me. I stepped foot on Sheman Nurseries, is still in Greenwich, Connecticut. And I had the opportunity to go there about a year ago. A friend of mine's a landscape contractor in Connecticut. And I got to tell you, nothing's changed, but I walked by the office that was Manny's, the plate glass windows you can see from the driveway, and I got a chill went up my spine, and I saw Manny sitting in his seat. And it brought such a smile to my face because it brought back memories into, my very early teens of when I worked for him. And I ended up working for him part-time for several years. But it was really a defining moment for me to really, and of humility, to really look back and see, how far I've come in the world and in this industry, in understanding, the aspects of culture, both good and bad.
So, what age was that approximately?
So you couldn't get your working papers, I think, to 14 years old. So I think I
Okay.
was about 14. I started when I was working for George Bukov, the Bulgarian guy with the garden center. I started with him at 12 years old. So
Wow.
yeah, so I started really, really young, and that's another whole story, But 14 years old is when I started working on weekends or my days off from school with Manny. Yeah.
So what was, I mean, so it really sounds like from a young age then you really had the ability to see the importance of leadership from a different perspective than probably most think of leadership, um, or being a boss or whatever you want to call that. And so, do you think at that point, um, you were really understanding what was really going on, or do you think that was something that was subconscious, that because that was the example that you had of what leadership and stuff was, that later on when you got to those leadership roles, that was kind of like you didn't like, that was your, example, and so that's what you pulled from? Or do you, like, you know what I'm saying? Does that question make sense? Like,
Absolutely. I actually think, and I want to share with you the opposite of Manny's management to my father's management. I think it was subconscious intuitiveness, meaning at a young age, I didn't understand it of what it was, but I was smart enough to recognize what it was or is, Um, I've always been a person to watch people and watch, their mannerisms of, what they do, how they move, and how they act. And, that was something that, at that young age, obviously, looking back at it, I was very, very good at. On the contrary, and what's really exciting about this is conversationally is I did a presentation at Yale, New Haven for the Connecticut Landscape Association probably about 10 years ago, and it was on company culture. And I used Manny and my father, their culture and their organizations, and their outcomes and everything uh, simultaneously. And I remember when I got done, and the illustrations of my father and the illustrations of Manny were just silhouettes. But when I started going through point by point and kind of like uncovering, the difference in their management styles and leadership styles and the cultures they built within their company, and then I pull off these silhouettes to become faces, I heard a gasp in the audience because a lot of people there connected to Manny because they knew him in the industry, and a lot of people connected in a gasp to my father because of this, this incredible outcome of his business. So on the opposite side, my father, and I guess to a detriment, my leadership style and management style is a little bit more of my father's than it is Manny's. So my father, the same thing. He was in the generic pharmaceutical industry. A short story is the first company he founded with a neighbor of ours who was an accountant actually went bankrupt.
mm,
And my father separated that relationship and started another company. And that company that he started became one of the fourth largest generic pharmaceutical companies in the world. And that company that he started in 2008 was sold for $8 billion. That's billion, to an Israeli pharmaceutical company called Teva, Teva Pharmaceuticals. And for anybody who's listening, if you really want to have some fun, you can Google my father. His name was Edwin A. Cohen. He passed away 2 years ago, but you Google my father and you'll see the history of his career in the pharmaceutical industry and being an innovator in pharmaceuticals. He actually sued the government, the Food and Drug Administration, in a class action lawsuit with other,
dang.
yeah, with other generic companies, and actually won. But it's a very interesting story. And regrettably, when he passed away, my sister, my brother, and I talked about why he didn't write a book, and we learned that he actually started to write a book, but he never finished it. But the story is absolutely incredible. I worked for my father part time, like I did with Manny Sheman when I was a kid, and I did everything from stuffing cotton in bottles to gluing labels on bottles before automation. But I liked in that organization that didn't I didn't like that. I like doing work around the factory. I like painting concrete walls, and I did landscape renovations and when I started my business for him, and so on and so forth. But my father had a very young management team as Manny, and when my father would bring somebody into his office, it meant the wrath of hell. Um, there was going to be a very, very serious conversation, and there was going to be a very serious outcome. And that outcome was probably, do your job or I'm going to fire you type of thing. But at the end of the day, my father made a lot of those executives very, very successful. and a lot of them retired as millionaires, probably at 40 years old. But unfortunately, a lot of them did not like my father. Okay, and they didn't like him because of that. Matter of fact, business style. It was, you have a job to do your job. If you don't know how to do it, I'll guide you or get you guidance. But he was just a no BS, type of person. So, there was two opposites, to it where Manny was very personable, and the personal or interpersonal relationship was very important. My father's relationship was more matter of fact and direct, which unfortunately is a little bit. I think I have a blend of the two of them. I think my leadership and management style is actually a blend of both. And I think as I've gotten older, I've come to understand the more importance of having a leadership and a management and a culture more like Manny had. So, so
What do
that's
you?
the story.
Yeah, I mean that's a really incredible kind of upbringing and contrast of two different styles.
Yeah.
Um, and is there a time where you is there like a moment in time between now and 14-year-old yourself that you had a moment of like I'm leading like my father. Oh man, I need to lead more like Manny.
Yes, I get my ass kicked with it every day.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it's hard. I'm just an honest guy. It's been hard, and what makes it even harder is my business is located in the South. Um, personalities are more subdued. They're not type A. I always tell people I'm a type A personality from up north. And I'm working, and then I'm not saying that there aren't type A personalities in the South. There certainly are, but an aggressive type A personality in Richmond, Virginia is not well taken. It's not well respected. Um, so for me in business, it's been a challenge, and it still sometimes is a challenge. You've met Howard, and you can see a distinctive difference in our personalities. And Howard, as a compliment, has taught me a lot about personalities and culture, and how to handle myself and handle things. On the flip side, there have been times when we completely disagree because I think, I think sometimes I'm just talking in context conversationally, not of Howard specifically. I think diplomacy is good. I think delegation is good. Um, but sometimes you gotta be matter of fact. I mean, how many, sometimes, asking a person to do something 10 times, gets to a point where maybe I don't need to ask them 10 times, maybe I shouldn't have to ask them 10 times. And you want to be a little bit more matter of fact with it. So I think in building a culture, I think it's like a recipe. Okay. I think what works at BCLS in many, many ways is the blend of the ingredients, and how the different personalities work together. And they always don't work together perfectly, but I do think we're intuitive enough in our organization to learn and understand and try to adjust and adapt. Um, but for me, if I had to rewrite the script, okay, I would rewrite the script a little bit more towards the Manny Sheman leadership and management style, um, but infuse it with accountability and an expectation in some sort of measurable way that is a little bit less abrasive.
So that's really interesting. If you were talking to your like previous self, knowing what you
Uh,
know now of all of these years of leadership and different companies and all of that kind of stuff, what would be like the one piece of advice to yourself just hiring your first people? What would be that leadership thing that you would tell yourself that you wish you knew now, that would make your life easier leading people?
empower and get out of the way, I think is the most. And when I say empower, you know, I think we have an organization of empowerment, you know, but sometimes we don't get out of the way. Sometimes I don't get out of the way. it's contradictory if you say to somebody, hey, I'm empowering you to do something, but then you're stepping in. And I don't like when people say I'm a micromanager, because I'm not. That's my perception. Okay. I'm highly intuitive to details. So I see a lot of things that other people don't see. And it does get confused for micromanaging. There's just going to be, and it's how a brain, I like to study of people, but it's how a brain processes. So for me, for an example, if I was to drive into a property, my brain, the first thing it says is the curb appeal looks great. And the second thing that happens next is it sees the first weed. Okay. And what I'm going to go after is the first weed, because my brain processes I'm a change management executive. Okay. I see change in organizations. Whether you agree with it or not, that's what I see. So I see problems first. So I would say, the answer to your question is empower the people and get out of the way, but get out of their way. Let them fail, and let them really learn from their fail.
Yeah, that's really good advice, because I hear so many people that are the one crew, the owners on the truck, wants to get off, but yet they're like, oh, I just can't, because I can't XYZ. And I think some of it comes down to they're afraid of those people making the mistake. You know what I'm saying? Like they don't trust them enough to let them make the mistake, to actually learn from it. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see so many companies that are solo truck operators, is that they never can get past the leadership and the ability to give people the trust to go out and do something. And even if they make a mistake, learn, have that as a learning moment.
Right.
Um,
I think, and again, I'm in a different position today where I'm really trying to step back a lot, and I'm really letting a lot of things that I would normally be involved with conversationally or commenting. I'm letting it go, and I'm letting it go because of that trust issue. But I'm also letting it go to not intentionally want people to fail, but I want the people to really learn from their failure. And I think they're not going to learn unless they, if I was to step in and say, well, what about this? They're not going to learn about it until they actually realize what about this is. And they have to learn from it that way. And I think the biggest stumbling blocks for that smaller owner is, the empowerment, getting out of the way, let other people do it. But there's a fear of people, when you have a lot of money on the line, and you have a business and a reputation, a brand, all those things on the line, the trust part of it is something that is scary, because it has an impact. I learned when I bought BCLS in 2016. I remember the first year we got cancellations. Okay. And it was, cancellations happen in December, the certified letters start coming out. And man, I remember when the first cancellation came in, I just bought the company, and it was, I looked at it, I was like, oh my God, this can't happen. This is horrible. Like, how do we screw up? How do we let this happen? I mean, this is ridiculous. And I allowed emotions to play into it. And today, and over the years, and this is the truth, over the years, when cancellations came in, the second year, the third year, my attitude changed. Let's learn from it. Okay. Did we lose the job because we didn't perform, or did we lose the job because the client didn't trust us? Okay.
mm,
And they went somewhere else. And I tell the team now, when we lose jobs, is if we learn something from the loss, that's the win. Okay. Because you have to go back and you have to reflect, because it's like when you sell work, Howard likes to say, you either got outsold or you got outbid. Okay. So somebody submitted a lower price, or somebody sold the job better than you. It's the same thing on the service side. You either delivered and were the trusted advisor and had the confidence in the client, or you didn't. And I think, what I like about BCLS and our journey, and look, I'm a transparent guy. Okay. It hasn't been an easy journey, and it's not. Okay. But I think at the end of the day, I think the learning part of it is really what makes, and I think you picked up on this when you were here in a lot of different ways, but I think the essence of what makes our company successful is learning. And I remember we hired a guy a few years ago, this grumpy irrigation guy, and he worked for us for like 3 months, and then came and he quit. And we asked him why he quit. He goes, "You lied to us." And he's like, "What are you talking about? We lied to you." He goes, "Well, you said, in 3 months, I was going to have, a review. I was going to have this and I was going to have that." And after he said it to us, we were like, man, like he called us a liar. Like we didn't lie to him. But then we evaluated, and what we learned is, man, we didn't lie. We let him down. And the reason we let him down was it wasn't intentional. It's because we didn't put the tracking mechanisms in place to say on the 60 or the 90-day anniversary of his employment here, he needs to have this review within 5 days. We didn't check that carefully. We didn't follow through on the promise that we gave him. And that example is something we've used forward to this day. Is we don't want anybody quitting this company, or we don't want to fire anybody unless we feel good. Okay. So when we fire somebody, we want to feel good about it. Is if we exhausted everything we could have done in our power to make that person successful. Anything short of that, we failed them.
It is so interesting that you bring this up, because I was talking to Howard about some of this stuff, and this was the exact story that he told to me as a pivotal moment in
Right.
some of the leadership stuff too. So it's interesting that you both have this story as kind of one of those moments of like reflection and how did we miss this? And because, it's so easy, I think, as the owner, the leader, the manager, whatever that position is of power, to some extent, it's easy to say, well, screw you, what are you talking about? We gave you a lot of opportunity. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just to kind of brush that off and be like, well, look at all the, look at all the good stuff we gave you. How can you not recognize that, we gave you all the things that we told you we were going to, or whatever.
Right.
And,
Well,
it's just, it takes a bigger person, a very big person to recognize those shortcomings, and then actually say, okay, what are we going to do about it? And then put a process and system in place to make sure that gets better in the future.
and we looked at the same perspective of people that have come through the company. And we've had a lot of people come through the company, and some of them were good, and honestly, some of them really sucked. But each one of them got us to a place. And the way we approach it now is that person gets us to a place. I'm going to use this example. How much time do we have, by the way?
Well, we still got 30 minutes, so we're
Okay,
good. We're good.
I'm going to use the example. So right now in my role, I'm my title's Chief Visionary Officer, but I'm instrumental in construction. I like selling the big construction projects. I like building the big construction projects, and I like winning the big construction projects. So my role today is more on the estimating side, internal, because we're building the external side. And I had a young lady working for me who helped me on estimating. Okay. And, her role in the company was to put the estimates together. And she was very good with the computer. She learned all the different estimating platforms and takeoff software we had. And, we sold some jobs, but we didn't have a good relationship with each other. Okay. And she quit. And she quit because she said I sucked. Okay. And when somebody says that, I take it personally. And I was like, oh man, this is like, how am I going to get the work done, this and that. And a day or two after she left, I felt good. Like, I was like, I feel good that she's not here. And it's not saying that she was bad, but I just feel like less pressure on me. And I realized that what made the relationship difficult was, in a lot of ways, she didn't do her job. Like, she would bring me a bid 5 minutes before it was due. Or she was a student and, she worked, part-time, she would throw a bid on my desk, at the last minute. And my bid board in the office, I would constantly have to say, can you update it? And then we hired a new estimator. And he comes from Site One, a little bit of older gentleman. a former police officer, so law enforcement background. And I think you met Mark, you did an interview with him. We got a great relationship, and he learned everything, and we work well together. He does the same things, but I learned after about 30 days, the reason the relationship is good is it makes my job easy. He doesn't give me bids at the last minute. He brings them to me days in advance. We talk about them. My bid board, anytime I look up, it's updated. And if I don't have to ask them to update it. And I realized that we had in our organization, because we had some other people leave this same time, we had a group of, and this is not against millennials, but we had a group of younger millennial aged people in the organization. And what we lacked in the organization was maturity and emotional maturity and emotional intuitiveness within the organization. And those three young people left, and we brought three new people in, which Mark is one of them. Carly and Sarah and Mark represent essentially the three replacements. And we saw a commonality that, I'm not saying that older people are better, but there was a level of emotional maturity with them that changed our organization in a way that's so much more positive. And what I realized is I'm not a bad person to work for. Okay. I'm actually a pretty good guy to work for. Do your job. Like, don't put me into a position where I have to ask for things 100 times. This goes back to the culture part. And that's why Marcus and I relationship works harmoniously. We're selling millions and millions of dollars worth of work. He's teaching me some things, and I'm teaching some things. We've had some conversations about being matter of, he's got an interesting personality when it comes to joking around, and so do I, and it works off of each other. But we've also had conversations about approach. Maybe sometimes you got to just change, your approach a little bit. So I think learning about the organization sometimes is more important than the selling of the work and doing the work and all that. It's about the people and seeing how all those ingredients work together. And that's what I like. So I spend a lot more time reflecting on this now. And Howard and I, it's a lot of times Howard will say to me, he goes, man, he'll say something, or I'll say something. He goes, man, I was thinking the same thing. Or we write something down, it says the same thing. So I think in a lot of ways, what's come to be very positive in our relationship is, at the end of the day, we do have a common interest, and we want the people to be successful. We want the culture to be good. I think we have a little bit of a difference opinion sometimes how we get there, but at the end of the day, we think alike in a lot of ways that what makes BCLS successful.
That's awesome.
That's the people. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's one of the things that I found with myself too. When I first started hiring people, it was people around my age. And so at the time it was like, I'm 18, 19, 20, hiring people and going through a lot of nightmares and that same kind of stuff. Like, I don't want to tell you how to do the job. Like, just go get it done. And I can explain it to you and explain it to you and explain it to you. But at some point you just have to kind of pick it up. And so it wasn't until I went through some really big heartaches, one pivotal moment to be specific. And I woke up and I said, you know what? I need to work on culture. I need to start being a leader and not a boss. And it's not my way or the highway. And I'm a tyrant. And then I need to start hiring older people that have more emotional, maturity and stability and all of that kind of stuff. And as soon as I hired somebody, that my next hire after getting these two guys left me that were 21 and 22, was a guy that was like 36, and it was night and day. I would send him to something, he'd get done, and he'd call me and be like, hey, I'm done. I'm like, what do you mean you're done? He's like, I'm done. They're like, what do you mean I'm not done? Like, it wasn't that big of a deal. And I'm like, well, the guys previous, it took him like all day to do that. Like, what are you talking about? It took you like 3 hours. And he's like, well, it's done. Like, come check it out. And so that was the moment where I was like, wait a second, like, hiring the people that just like, that's a part of it. Like, you can have all of the other things behind it,
Right.
But unless you're hiring the right people that know the process, that appreciate the process, that, actually will work and some of that kind of stuff, you're going to probably be spinning your wheels. And, the follow-up question, I can hear myself playing devil's advocate in my mind. Somebody listening to this is going to go, okay, Steven, okay, Luke, this is great, but I can't ever find the people that actually want to work. And so what do this is an interesting thing for me because when I was talking to Howard was telling me when we met here in Dallas or before we came out to see you, he was telling me, Luke, we don't really have a hiring problem. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't have a hiring problem? And I actually got to witness that firsthand. The first day that I'm there, I think there were 6 people that just came in off the street for an interview.
To a picnic table.
And I'm like, what is happening right now? I'm like, anybody else in the industry is dying to get one person to just raise their hand to say, hey, I want to work. And you have 6. I mean, they walked in the door and people were like, oh yeah, so-and-so, can you come over here and do the interview, for these people? And I'm just like, was this scheduled? And they're like, no, they just came in off the street. And I'm like, how do you have 6 people that come in off the street? And so, I think part of that is the culture you guys have built, the, coming in off the street, like, who knows? Like, it's probably the guys talking behind the scenes at their church, at their watering holes that they go hang out with, their friends and family that are in the industry or whatever. And they're just saying, oh, well, I this is a really good place to work and that kind of stuff. How do you find the people that actually want to work versus the people that are like, they're going to take you for a roller coaster and one day it's great. And the next day it's just as like, it's as bad as it was great. It's like just a up and down. The highs are highs and the lows are lows. Is there anything that comes to mind as far as finding the people that, aren't going to take you on that emotional roller coaster?
Yeah. So unfortunately, you see the positive side of it to people coming in. You don't get to spend the time here to see the emotional roller coaster side of it. But let's go back to the first thing. I've always used this analogy with hiring as a company needs to be a magnet. Okay. And if you use the magnet attracts analogy, and if you look through the course of history of successful organizations, you'll see that there's a reason why Google hires the best technology people. There's Apple hires the best technology people, is because those companies have become incredible magnets to draw the best of the best. When we first bought BCLS, we had problems finding people. And I would always say to the team is, you got to charge the magnet. And they would be like, what are you talking about? I said, we have to keep doing what we're doing. We have to keep, working on our culture. We have to keep on, training people and mentoring people. And, if somebody's here for a year, we have to get that person to be here for a year and a half and then 2 years. And what you're going to find is the stronger that magnet attracts, people are just going to come off the street and come in here. And what you witnessed is the magnets attracting. Okay, so it is very, very common that of what you see that was not staged or an anomaly. It is an occurrence. BCLS is a good place to go work in a lot of ways. The emotional roller coaster side of it is comes down to people. Okay, and unfortunately, people are influenced by a lot of different things in their personal life and their professional life. Their career goals, their past, their present, and all those different things. And unfortunately, in our industry, we tend. I like Howard's analogy. You can't get $20 an hour thinking from $10 an hour people. I think that's just a nature of the business. Is those people are going to come into the organization, but in the analogy of the magnet, you have to go to the numbers. So if you get 10 good people in, or I'm sorry, you get 10 people in and 9 of them are good, and one of them is, we call them the F nut. I don't know if Howard can explain to you what an F nut is. It's going to be a chapter in my book. But the person who, says they're going to come to work every day and they don't come to work, or they don't follow, Howard's 4 H's, they're not going to last here. We don't have a tolerance for it.
Mm,
And, if you don't live up to those 4-H's and those must-haves that Howard has, you're not going to last here. And if you resign and leave this position on bad terms, or if we fire you on bad terms, you're most likely are not going to get rehired. Although, we have hired some people back and we've learned some lessons from that. But, I think to answer the question as a whole is it's not easy. And I think the commonality to building a successful organization is understanding your organization yourself. I think we know where we're really, really good. I think we know where we're bad, but I think the most important of it is we're constantly learning, and we're constantly evaluating mistakes. And when somebody leaves, we might not always agree between people of why that person leaves. I have a manager right now we have a very exciting time here because we've done some really key promotions from inside. And now that I see these key promotions from inside happening, I'm a little bit more supportive of the internal promotions with some of these leadership positions because I'm seeing some positive things coming out of it. But we have a manager here that, in his daily wrap up the other day, wrote about a problem with one of his crew supervisors. And one of the things that he explained in his daily wrap up was using objectivity, okay, to understand the problem before assuming what the problem was. And it struck a real chord with me, with this one individual, because of something that he said recently about me in a context of a problem. And I realized in that is he's not using the objectivity that I want him to, because he's not seeing it as clearly yet as it needs to be explained, but he's starting to understand it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a lunch with him, and I want to reinforce the positive of what I saw. Okay, because here's another thing in my personality types. Okay, and our leadership, people who have leadership styles like me, we want to blame first and praise second. Okay, and I think one of the best advices I got from my friend recently was it's okay to blame. Okay, but you have to praise. Okay, and he said to me, Steven, if you do it, and he learned this, he bought an irrigation franchise. It's praise, problem, praise. Okay, so give praise first, discuss the problem, and you can be matter of fact with the problem. Okay, and the tone, you can be matter of fact, but then end it with praise. Okay, and I'm trying to use that advice that he gave me. So in this situation with this individual, I see my praises, I'm seeing a difference, a noticeable difference in how he's using objectivity versus assuming. What he's not doing yet, for me personally in the relationship, is he's not putting himself in my shoes. Okay. And looking at objectivity from my shoes. Okay. So if you were in my shoes, how would you then see the problem? Okay. I know how you see it from your shoes, but step in. And that's something I've always liked is I believe that people need to step in and step out of shoes at all levels, because the way you see something when you're in your shoes can be different than the way you see it in my shoes. And sometimes it's black and white. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes maybe the way that person sees it, maybe sometimes the way I see it's not right. But I think talking about it and sharing it, I think is something that's positive.
that's good. That's
But
really good.
I like the objectivity. I like the objectivity word in the last few months, because I see how it's influencing our organization differently now as people are growing. Like the supervisor who became the manager, he's looking at things differently now because now he's a manager. He has different responsibilities and different accountabilities. So his objectivity is more.
Yeah. No, that's good. And I'm sure that made his job makes him in the job that he's in now even more productive. And he
Absolutely.
probably relates to the people that replaced him coming up even more, and he probably has even more rapport with that person because he's been in that person's shoes, and he can say, "Hey, look, Billy, I know exactly what you're going through. I was exactly there 6 months ago. Boom, boom, bang." And that person's probably, they're probably somewhat friends, really close, because, he can relate to them and say, like, I get where you're coming from.
Can I share the example with you specifically?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so he had his supervisor. the supervisor of one of his crews, there was some sort of, I don't want to say altercation, but some sort of frustration between the supervisor and the crew. The supervisor parked the truck on the side of the road and walked off and left the truck. Okay. And the crew on the side of the road. He asked the team lead, okay, to drive the truck back to the yard, which happened. The truck got back to the yard. Okay. So there was a problem. And in his wrap up, he wrote that he's going to address the problem. But how do you think I see it? What would you think? You're an intuitive guy. How do you think I see that situation?
How did we get here in the first place?
That's important. But here's how I see it. The driver of the truck is the captain of the ship. Okay. He left the $250,000 truck and trailer on the side of the road that he's responsible for. So for me, you know, what's important, what I'm concerned about at my level is, hey man, you just left my $250,000 truck on the side of the road. Like that's like a major problem. Okay. Now, you know, something led up to that to happen. I have confidence that you're going to resolve that. But what I explained to the supervisor, to the manager is, I also want you to think about the $250,000 asset. Okay. When I get on a plane to fly, the first thing I do is, and this is just me, is I like to look up the plane I'm flying in and how much the plane costs. Okay. And then the perspective of it is those two pilots on that A737 I flew on the other day, it's a $40 million plane. And that airline hired those two guys to fly their $40 million plane. Plus the 200 some odd souls on board that they're responsible for. That supervisor is not only responsible for that $250,000 truck and trailer, he's responsible for the 6 guys on that crew. The captain never leaves the ship. Pilot, captain on a boat, whatever it is, regardless of what your frustrations are. And that's what I want that manager to understand in his teaching to that crew supervisor. It's not, hey, you can't just walk off the, you know, we'll just leave the truck there. It's the responsibility that we hired you. And you know what? You're not just responsible for cutting the grass on the properties. You're responsible for everybody in your truck, their life, their safety, their health, their welfare, and you're responsible for that asset for the company. That's what we trust you to be with. So he doesn't see it that way. But what I want to discuss is these are the things that you need to see, because this is the way I see it, because I'm the one who's responsible financially for that asset.
And the liability that comes from somebody hitting them sitting on the side of the road or
the
whatever
driver,
it may be.
Right. I don't know if the guy who drove the truck back was licensed or not licensed or qualifiable or whatever. But these are things that, you know, this is part of the teaching that this manager has to learn, so he can explain that in his teaching to that supervisor, the level of responsibility. And I do this, you know, I like to role play this and think about it. I mean, when I see pilots, you know, yesterday the plane I flew was small. The pilots looked like they were in their 20s. And I looked up the plane and it's like, you know, $3 or $4 million jet. And it's like, you know, these guys are flying a, you know, $4 million jet for United, and they're young guys and they have this, you know, 75 passengers, and that's a lot of responsibility to have. You know, you have to take your responsibility seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great point. It really is. We have 10 minutes. And one of the things that I want to really cover, but we're going to have you on another show because there's just no way to cover everything that I want to get done in 1 hour. But quickly, within 10 minutes, I want to know we got there, we got kind of off track through some of these many different points, which I'm really glad that we did, because we've got so many good ones. Talk me through, so okay, we know 14-year-old to what, graduating high school and getting out of there. Talk me through the next steps. So did you go to college? Where did you get into? How did you continue that journey to BCLS today? Talk me through the journey of
absolutely
you to
so
now.
When I worked for those garden centers and I worked for Manny Sheman in high school, I started working at a retail garden center, and I started doing landscape installations on the side. And it was at that time, that garden center chain was the largest garden center chain in the country. It was called Flower Time. And people would come in all weekend long and ask for, hey, can you put these plants in I'm buying? I'm like, yeah, sure. And I was like a little mafia owned business guy back then. And it's like, I had this little planting job, and then I hired, a couple of my coworkers to help me with it. So in high school, my business started growing, growing, growing. I was fortunate enough, because of the success of my father, when I was in high school, and this is in the 80s, and being where I lived, I was able to get what's called performance bonds. And I started doing government work. I started building parks and doing park construction and jobs that you had to post a bond for. Okay, and a bond is nothing but more than a piece of paper that has a value to it that says that if you fail the job, the insurance company is going to pay. Well, when I was 18 years old, I had bonding, and I started doing these parks and this government work. And it's another show that you're going to like the story, but I was doing that, and I was also going to college at the same time. And when I was applying for colleges, I realized that I didn't want to go away to school because I had my business going. That I wanted to go to school somewhere close. So I enrolled in State University in New York at Farmingdale, which was a horticultural school in Farmingdale, Long Island. And when I got into school, after the first semester, I realized that I was too smart, and the kids were really stupid, because these were kids who just graduated high school and were, going into landscape and horticulture. And a lot of them's parents owned nurseries or landscape companies on Long Island. But I also had a business that was running. And at that time, in high school, my business was doing $1 million a year. I was doing really, really good. So I ended up going to school part-time. I switched to a part-time, go to school at nights for 4 years instead of graduating in 2 years. And I realized that I didn't like school, in the sense of I didn't like a structured curriculum of like taking tests, but I liked learning. So I went to school and I took all different types of classes in horticulture and business law and all things like that. That in a culmination gave me a lot of experience to do what I was able to do. But so when I graduated high school, I had a very successful landscape company, and I was actually in Westchester County, New York. So that was back in 1977. I started my business. In 1980, I incorporated my business, and I was one of the first unionized landscape companies in Westchester County. And in the early 80s, and this is where the story's for another show, I was involved doing a lot of construction work. And a lot of those jobs were unionized jobs, both in Westchester and New York City. And that's how I cut my teeth, is doing union construction work. I didn't buy my first lawnmower until 1988. Is after going through, I think I've been through, 3 or 4 recessions. I had my first recession in the early 80s. I think it was 82 or 82 to 84 was the first recession. And then the second recession after that, I decided I need to diversify the business and bought a lawnmower in 1988 and started doing landscape maintenance. And it's been going on since then. So I made my first million in my early 20s. I lost my first million in my mid 20s. And I from there, I continue to get wisdom. My mother is 93 years old, and I've shown her articles that I've written in different trade magazines, and she lives in Richmond, and every once in a while I'll take her out and show her jobs, and she'll say to me, "Why weren't you this smart when you were younger?" Because you're so successful now. And I would say to her, it only took me, 30 plus years just to learn, Mom. That's all. Success doesn't come with failure. And it's true. If I look back at, my father's history, what was a bankrupt company to a second company that was almost bankrupt, to become one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies that, invented some of the most common prescribed medications that people in our country and world take. You would never believe it, but it's been a great journey. And I think the most important part, I think as I get older, I'm over 60 now. I think the best part of the journey is the reflection. I still like to learn, but I like to reflect. on the past, and I like to learn for the present.
Wow. That's awesome. So at some point you get done with construction and stuff in New York and stuff. How do you get to BCLS?
So in 2003, I ended up selling my company, my first company, to a small private, at that time was a small ownership group that I sold my company. This was in the early in the 80s, when merger and acquisitions and things like that today weren't prevalent then. But I ended up selling my first company to a small ownership group, and I worked for them for a couple, I think about a year, before I realized that I don't like working for other people. I resigned and I started doing, and I've never worked for anybody really at that point as an executive. I ended up doing consulting, starting my Greenmark Consulting Group and doing consulting. And that opportunity led me to in 3 C-suite positions that I've had over the course of my career. In 2016, I was consulting for a firm in Florida, and they really wanted me to become the president of the company. And it started off as a consulting agreement, but I was a good fit. It was interesting. They actually did an assessment. They were looking for somebody very specific to come into their company for consulting. They were looking for a very specific change management executive. So I fit, and they ended up hiring me. They wanted me to become president of the company, and it didn't work out. It wasn't the right fit. And I decided that I don't want to work for anybody, and consulting's good, but it's always, it's that next paycheck, it's always that next client. But as a consultant, you have to go into a company, and you have to always role play. If this was my company, what would I do? So every time I go into a company, I want to buy it, because I see the opportunity. So that's what planted the seed that, maybe I should make a new entry, in. So in 2016, BCLS Incorporated was a local business for sale. And the long and short of it is explained this way. It was a $2.3 million company losing $500,000 a year. And we can never, Howard or I, who Howard worked for the company, we can never figure out why it was losing, because we think the books were being cooked. But I decided to buy the business, and Howard was the owner was absentee. Howard was the COO of the business, and we made an offer on the business, and it took us, I think about a year and a half to close it. It was a frustrating process closing it. But I went to the bank, and I said to the bank, look, I have a business I want to buy. It's not making any money, but I think it has a lot of potential in this market. And they said, okay, do a business plan. And I gave them a turnaround business plan, and I used some people I know as advisors in helping me create the plan, the financials and everything else. And I had put considerable amount of skin in the game, and the bank put some skin in the game. But to make a long story short, we took out a 7-year SBA guarantee loan on the business. We paid that loan back in 5 years.
Wow.
And BCLS started with 23 employees, and I think we have 80 to 90 employees now, and we're close to a $10 million company now in a matter of 7 years. So we've had some great successes in our journey. So we've had some great learnings, but we've definitely had some great successes.
I mean, that's a heck of a story, from losing $500,000 a year at 2.5 to growing to 10 million. I mean, that takes a lot of insight and work, and all that kind of stuff to make it happen. So that's super cool. And that's what I wanted to get to was how you've gotten to this point, because you've had such a incredible journey of going through the industry ebbs and flows. And I think that's probably one of the things too. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it probably has been a part of the success of BCLS, the fact that you've had the opportunity to, one, grow and sell a company already, and then two, be in and out of other businesses and see so many things of goods, the bads, the uglies. How are other people doing things that then bring you into, when you now acquire BCLS, that's going to take you to the next level, because you have a wider range of experience than my way or the highway.
Oh, absolutely. It's good testing ground. If we do another show, I can really walk you through that, and the listeners through that, because that's been another incredible learning for the company. Because what we've learned is a lot of the things that I did in consulting, that we put into practice here actually didn't work. But
Oh, wow.
we were able to tweak them a little bit and influence them in some different ways to get them to work well. So I always tell people, when they come for a visit to BCLS, a lot of things that you're going to see are things that I will talk about in consulting, or I'll suggest in consulting. Some of them you're going to see working here, and some of them aren't working here. And I always tell the team, just talk transparently about it, because there's no reason to lie or hide. I think that's one of the things that people like in my consulting practice is not only the holistic approach, but it's not cookie cutter.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, every company's different. Every company has different personalities and different ways they work. And it's interesting. This is what I love about what I'm doing now versus being in the industry and the daily grind of putting in plants and all that kind of stuff, is that it's so interesting to me how you may have the same outcome. You have two companies with the same service offering, but they have two completely different ways of getting there. And both of them make it work. And one may make it work better than the other in some ways, and vice versa. And the other thing that's really interesting is that about this industry is that there's so many different things that this industry incorporates that you really can't have a cookie cutter one box fits all mold, because there's so many different markets, there's so many different climates and regions of the country, that the way that you may put a plant in Richmond, Virginia, in the soil type that you have is completely different than what we have here in Dallas with the clays and some of that kind of stuff. And so, there's just so many different, and that's just one aspect of the actual putting the making the actual outcome happen. But then you have the management styles, you have the culture differences, you have all of those different things. And so it's really interesting to see the different, points of views, personalities, ways that people make things happen. Because if you don't, and you're only emulating what you have in your mind or what other people in your market are doing, I think there's a lot of times where you can leave things on the table, which is why I love this show, is because we get to bring experts in like you and help bring some knowledge to so many people that pay attention and listen to this. So
we'll end it this way. No two companies are alike, but they all have similarities.
That's good.
Okay.
That's good. That's it. Let's wrap it up there. Steven, how do people listening get a hold of you, follow you, get more information? If people are looking for the consultative type, role, where does somebody reach out to you and find out more information about that kind of stuff?
Yeah, great. They can go to our website, which is Greenmark Group Consulting.com. We also have a coaching website, which is greenmarkgroupcoaching.com, or you can reach out to me on the phone at 610-905-3637, which is my cell phone. Or, you can follow me on social media, on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And everybody knows who I am.
There we go. There we go. How do we get you back on Turfs Up Radio to have a show every week?
Listen, I told Darren, I'll tell everybody this. I love doing the show. I love sharing my passion. I'll come onto your show any time.
Okay,
for me to do my own show again, I need a good sidekick.
Hey, well, we should talk about that. I'll be your sidekick.
Okay, good. Let's talk more.
I'll take a second show. We'll make it happen. Let's make it a once a month show.
Okay, let's talk about
it. Let's just figure that out.
Listen, have a blessed Thanksgiving.
All right, dude.
And thank you for sharing all the project work with me. I look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on the show, and we will have you on in the near future for sure.
Good. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks so much.
Take care. Happy Thanksgiving. So long.